Romanticism stands out on its own and can be read with the benefit as a separate work, but it needs to be kept in mind that the book belongs to a larger corpus in the context of which its terms and arguments are more easily understood. Someone not already attuned to Babbitt's thought may miss the interconnections and subtleties of particular formulations. His prose can strike the inattentive reader as merely essayistic or even impressionistic. Babbitt's easy and unpretentious command of a broader range of sources as he uses wit and humor to contribute to his similar appearance. In reality, his writing is the opposite of casual. It has a coherence, continuity, and a profundity that emerges more and more clearly as his books are studied carefully together. The almost epigrammatic and frequently brilliant short comments about authors and literary phenomena that fill Babbitt's books are seen to emanate from a single firmly held central vision. The assimilation of Rousseau and Romanticism may be assisted by reviewing a few closely related ideas that are basic to all of Babbitt's thoughts and crucial for the understanding of this book. One in his idea of a special quality of will, a higher will, or an inner check, in which ethical good and reality have their ultimate source. An equally important notion is the centrality of imagination in shaping man's character and outlook of life. These two powers come together in what Babbitt calls the ethical imagination, the hallmark of truly great art. He contrasts the higher will and the ethical imagination with the lower will and corresponding imagination. In interpreting these ideas, it is helpful to draw selectively from the Italian philosopher Benedetto Croce, who lived from 1866 to 1952, author of such major works as Aesthetics in 1902, Philosophy of the Practical in 1908, Logic 1908. Babbitt wrote with respect about Croce, but was critical of the lack of attention to the ethical dimension of art in Croce's early Aesthetics. He also could not accept Croce's strong leanings in the direction of a pantheistic Hegelian monism, which dissolves the distinction between good and evil. For all his technical philosophical brilliance, Croce does not quite have Babbitt's incisiveness in dealing with the relationship between will and imagination. In general, it can be argued that Babbitt has a more developed ethical sensibility than Croce. Still, the thinking of the two men is closely related in important respects. Croce's aesthetics eventually became virtually indistinguishable from Babbitt's. Croce's philosophically systematic exploration of some issues on which they are in essential agreement is often useful in explicating Babbitt. Croce can also provide some important philosophical supplements to Babbitt. Part 3, Moral Irresponsibility and Sham Vision. The central problem of the modern age is, for Babbitt, an erosion of individual moral responsibility. The general direction of life is ultimately determined by the quality of will at the root of action, but the will is always acting in intimate cooperation with the imagination. The moral erosion of which Babbitt speaks is manifest in a type of imagination that both expresses and inspires it. This imagination is abundantly present in Rousseau and more generally in the Romantic movement. Poets, painters, composers, and others representing that kind of vision are playing a leading role in reorienting Western life and sensibility. Imagination that more or less subtly shields and diverts the individual from painful moral self-scrutiny and excuses him from improving self has always existed in some form. Man's inclination to take the easy course guarantees the appeal of the escapist, wishful imagination. In persons of generally sound character, flights of self-indulgent fantasies are merely for temporary relaxation and do little harm. But in the modern era, Rousseau and many others have inspired a great flowering of such imagination. It has acquired an aura of moral and aesthetical nobility and refinement. For large numbers of people, it has become the dominant form of intuition, shaping their basic self-understanding and view of the world, their fondest dreams and innermost aspirations. This form of imagination has given rise to a vast and varied cultural and socio-political movement. According to Babbitt, quote, what is disquieting about the time is not so much its open and avowed materialism as what it takes to be its spirituality, unquote. Materialism is rather easily recognized and dealt with. What is not so easily identified and counteracted are the decadent and escapist forms of imagination that manage to masquerade as high spirituality. Babbitt freely grants, indeed himself stresses, that where there is no vision the people perish. But he also insists that where there is a sham vision, they perish even faster. The danger of Rousseauism and related currents is that they present as liberating and elevating visions of life that are in actuality insidious evasions of all real moral responsibility. According to Rousseau, humanity is by nature good. There is within the human self no chronic propensity for evil, says Rousseau. This flattering assessment relieves man of the old obligation to discipline himself. Moral virtue is redefined this way. No longer is it meant to be no longer is it measured by the strength of will that used to be known as moral character, but now by tender emotion. Tender emotion becomes the measurement of virtue. In religion, ethics, and politics, professions of humanitarian benevolence replace concrete personal responsibility as evidence of virtue. Babbitt expects grave political consequences of the deterioration of the old Western view of human nature and the spread of moral sentimentalism. He deals with this subject in length in Democracy and Leadership. Though not himself a confessional Christian, Babbitt does not think that the American constitutional order can survive the weakening of the Christian sense of sin and of the related habit of individual ethical self-restraint. Writing in the 1920s, Babbitt pointed to this spreading glorification of social service as proof that the real morality and religion were being replaced by the merely sentimental spirituality of humanitarianism. Babbitt dreads the prospect of a society in which social political busybodies invoking service meddle in everybody else's life while neglecting man's primary moral task, the improvement of self. Domestically, sentimental humanitarianism would greatly expand government to carry out various allegedly benevolent schemes. Internationally, it would lead, as in the case of President Woodrow Wilson, to moralistic crusading. Both at home and abroad, the advocacy of service masks a grasp for power. It signifies the drive of the imperialistic ego to throw off restraints. No limits need to be placed on self that seeks the good in mankind. The new virtue does not, like the old, aim chiefly at control of self, but at control of others. One of the themes of Babbitt's analysis of Rousseau and Romanticism is the glaring, but in Babbitt's view, entirely predictable, discrepancy between stated ideas and actual behavior. To avert the danger to civilization of the conceited imagination of sentimental humanitarianism, it is necessary to expose the moral dissipation of the will that it both expresses and inspires. Much of Babbitt's writing is devoted to explaining and illustrating the intimate relationships between qualities of will and corresponding qualities of imagination, and to show that moral irresponsibility derives much of its appeal from the fact that it can present itself in aesthetically appealing dress. For Babbitt, the field of aesthetic creativity covers a wide variety of experience and ranges from merely decorative to visions of large and lasting significance. Determining whether a particular work has great or negligible artistic value requires, among other things, a consideration of its treatment of life's ethical dimension. Works of art rank low, Babbitt argues, which ignore or distort the human moral condition. He ranks most highly works that combine imaginative power with profundity of ethical experience. It is important to understand that while Babbitt is greatly impressed in the ethical dimension of romantic imagination and aesthetical expression in general, for him art is imagination, not morality. as art is distinguished by intensity and coherence of intuition. As art, it is distinguished by intensity and coherence of intuition. Since life has many sides, art must also express much besides moral conditions. But serious art must not be judged on the narrowly aesthetic grounds of l'art pour l'art.